Good morning. It's Friday, March the 4th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have what? Me worry? True conservative political priorities, no free lunch, and the battle over collective bargaining in government. All that and more when I come back. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for March the 4th. You will pursue your enemies and overtake them. My precious child, you do not need to be filled with terror and fear when your enemies plot against you and pursue you. Trust instead in me, for indeed I am your God, and your times are indeed in my hands. In the shelter of my presence you are hidden from your enemies and from the intrigues of evil men. Do not be afraid of your enemies. I have given them unto your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. But don't stop. Pursue your enemies. Attack them from the rear, for I, the Lord your God, have given them into your hand. I will remove your enemies from your land, just as I would remove savage beasts, and the sword will not pass through your country. Psalm 31, verses 14 through 15, Psalm 20. Joshua chapter 10, verse 8, and chapter 19, Leviticus chapter 26, verses 6 through 8. Prayer declaration. I trust you, Lord. I celebrate and shout because you are kind. You saw my suffering and you cared for me. You kept me from the hands of my enemies and you set me free. I will praise you, Lord, for showing great kindness when I was a city under attack. You answered my prayer when I shouted for help. Amen. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for March the 4th. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious and realistic. He is the person that understands that culture is the foundation for politics. He acknowledges a benevolent universe. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Thank you. What are the true conservative tactics in support of true conservative strategy to defeat the socialists? Number one, and most important, that the true conservative refuse to prove a negative and insist that the socialist instead prove a positive. Thank you. So what is the true conservative strategy for defeating the socialists politically in this country? It is to attack the socialists from the bottom up, to demoralize and defeat the rank and file socialist that we encounter each and every day. And by so doing, we will discourage them from returning people like Nancy Pelosi to office. Thank you. What are the true conservatives' political priorities? Number one, the abolition of abortion throughout the country. Number two, making all nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons obsolete. Number three, the decertification of all public employee unions throughout the country. Thank you. The foreign policy of the Biden administration, I'm thinking about this because I'm thinking, well, what would be the true conservative, response to what's going on, say, in Ukraine? Well, the true conservative knows that we're limited. We don't have control over everything. We don't pretend to. The left does all the pretending. So in this particular case, there's nothing we can do. America has elected supposedly the old Joe administration, which has what I refer to as the Alfred E. Newman foreign policy, otherwise known as "What Me Worry" or the cross your fingers foreign policy, and cross your fingers and hope for the best foreign policy. And there's nothing we can do except cross our fingers, hope for the best, and that's it. And every person that voted for Joe Biden, the invasion of Ukraine is on you. The high inflation, that's on you. Every embarrassing thing that comes out of his mouth, that's on you. You're the ones that created this. So, but I think it's a great little slogan, the Alfred E. Newman administration and the Alfred E. Newman foreign policy. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. Nothing is more usual among states which have made some advances in commerce than to look on the progress of their neighbors with a suspicious eye, to consider all trading states as their rivals, and to suppose that it is impossible for any of them to flourish but at their expense. In opposition to this narrow and malignant opinion, I will venture to assert that the increase of riches and commerce in any one nation, instead of hurting, commonly promotes the riches and commerce of all its neighbors, and that a state can scarcely carry its trade and industry very far where all the surrounding states are buried in ignorance, sloth, and barbarism. David Hume. It is not rich countries that hurt poor countries, but poor countries that hurt rich countries, according to the great Enlightenment philosopher. His reasoning, the economic treasure of a flourishing country inevitably spills over into neighboring countries, whereas the shortcomings of a country limits the trade and capacity of its neighboring countries. Indeed, this has been evident throughout modern history that prosperous countries are a benefit to their continental neighbors, and weak ones are an albatross to theirs. And that was, there's no free lunch. And now, Chapter 1 of the book, Government Against Itself, Public Union Power and its consequences. Chapter 1 is divided into sections. First section is called The Battle Over Collective Bargaining in Government. Quote, meticulous attention should be paid to the special relations and obligations of public servants to the public itself and to the government. The process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into the public service. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Quote, it is impossible to bargain collectively with the government, unquote. AFL-CIO President George Meany. When one thinks of millionaires, one usually thinks of corporate executives, real estate moguls, high-profile lawyers, tech wizards, professional athletes, and investment bankers. One does not think of police officers, firefighters, or school teachers. Yet public employees are one of the fastest-growing groups of millionaires in the country. And this isn't just because $1 million isn't what it used to be. Today, upon retirement in their mid-50s, cops, firefighters, and teachers will be paid handsome pensions and receive health care coverage until they die. If one calculates the value of their net worth to include their retirement packages, many have already become millionaires. Indeed, those who spend their entire careers in public service are often among the highest earners in their states upon retirement. 8 states pay on average over $1 million in pension benefits to a retired worker, and 23 states pay about $750,000 or more over the course of a worker's retirement. Take the case of Glenn Goss. At the age of 21, Goss joined the police force in Delray Beach, Florida. In 2005, he retired at age 42 after 20 years on the job. He had achieved the rank of commander, and his final salary was $90,000 a year. Upon retirement, he began receiving a $65,000 annual pension, which is guaranteed for life and indexed for inflation. His retirement package also includes a health care plan worth approximately $10,000 a year. If one considers that male life expectancy in the United States is approaching 80 years, Goss will be receiving his pension and health benefits for another 38 years. Still in his 40s and in good health, Goss decided to return to work even after he was officially retired. Rather than launch a new career, however, he went back to police work in Highland Beach, a neighboring community from where he used to work. The job he took was nearly identical in terms of salary and benefits to the one he left. This practice is commonly referred to as double dipping. Put it all together, and an estimation of his current net worth is $2 million. As another example, look at the arrangement that Michael Hirth has secured. A 55-year-old fireman in Hallandale Beach, Florida. He participates in a deferred retirement option program. It allows him to retire but continue working. Under this program, Hirth receives his pension and salary simultaneously. He can also direct pension dollars into a fund that guarantees an 8% annual return. Year after year, if the fund doesn't perform to that benchmark, the state of Florida is on the hook for the difference. Finally, consider the case of Joe Smith, a gym teacher and longtime football coach at Addison Trail High School in DuPage County, Illinois. He earned more than $184,000 in the 2008-2009 school year. Under contractual provisions, his 35 years of teaching experience and master's degree boosted his salary. Now retired, he enjoys full pension and health care benefits. Back in a minute. Thank you. Stories of such lavish compensation may make some readers indignant. Personal favorite is the lifeguard in Newport Beach, California, who retired at 51 years old with a $108,000 a year pension. For many people struggling in the private sector, to say nothing of the unemployed, these arrangements appear outrageously inequitable, especially since these same workers are footing the bill for public employees through their tax dollars. During the Great Recession, government employees became the envy of many workers toiling in the regular economy, where the average salary hovers around $51,000 a year and benefits are much less generous, if workers have them at all. Indeed, the job security, pension, and health benefits and work schedules that most public employees enjoy are things that most private sector workers can only dream about. And these differences from the private economy are not altogether new. One journalist remarked 30 years ago that altogether, public employment is one sweet deal. Generous pay and benefits, lifetime job security, meaningless performance evaluations, and last but not least, protection from all swings of fortune that affect workers in private industry. Yet, facile indignation about the inequities is not the most important thing about these examples. By all accounts, Glenn Goss is a decent cop, Michael Hurth a competent fireman, and Joe Smith a dedicated teacher, and they are far from our best rewarded public servants. Pointing out their levels of compensation is not intended to attack these people personally or public employees generally. Government workers are hugely important. They put out fires, ensure our safety, and teach our children. We want good, well-qualified people doing these jobs. The difficulties stem from the fact that there are millions of similarly compensated public employees across the country. Government employment accounts for more than 20.3 million jobs, 17% of total U.S. employment, with the vast majority of these jobs in state and local governments. The focus of this book is therefore more on the latter than the former, because that is largely where the action is. In addition, the scope of collective bargaining in the federal government is much more limited than it is in most state and local governments where it is practiced. The aggregate cost of public employee compensation, including pay, pension, and health care, has contributed mightily to creating a fiscal burden that threatens to weaken state and local governments across the country. The best current estimates of the unfunded pension liability for state and local government is around $3.2 trillion, or approximately 21% of total U.S. gross domestic product. And that doesn't include healthcare liabilities, which are harder to estimate, but probably add another $1 trillion, which by itself is equal to about 1/3 of state and local government revenue. Furthermore, the rate at which government workers are retiring is faster than the rate at which people are retiring in the private sector. By 2030, the number of retired public workers will equal the number of people employed by state and local government. Therefore, state and local governments are allocating larger shares of their budgets to retirement benefits, pensions, and health care to their past and current employees. And even as state and local government jobs have declined by some 671,000 positions since 2009, spending by state and local governments has increased by $200 billion. As expenditures on benefits increase, they crowd out government spending on parks, education, public safety, and other services on which the poor and middle class rely. In short, government costs more, but does less. What contributed to creating this situation? There are, of course, many explanations, but the most important is that Goss, Hurth, and Smith all belong to unions. More specifically, they belong to public employee unions. These unions have been particularly adept due to the advantages they enjoy over other interest groups in securing better pay, benefits, and job protection for their members. And many of these items are connected, since salary increases translate into higher pension liabilities. Pursuing their interests in politics and at the bargaining table has often translated into Samuel L. Gomper's famous labor dictum: more. Clearly, that's great for our public servants. However, it's not so good for everyone else. The problem with unions in the public sector is that in order to serve the interests of their members, they hamstring government's ability to address social problems, reduce inequality, and enhance social cohesion. And the shorter way of putting that is they have a conflict of interest. As James Madison remarked long ago, quote, "The great desideratum in government is such a modification of sovereignty as will render it sufficiently neutral between the different interests and factions, and at the same time sufficiently controlled itself from setting up an interest adverse to that of the whole society," unquote. Unfortunately, public sector unions constitute just such an adverse interest. Too often, the pursuit of their interests compromises the public's interest in low-cost but highly productive government that sensibly allocates scarce resources. Again, conflict of interest. It is for these reasons that Franklin Roosevelt and George Meany, both champions of organized labor, opposed collective bargaining with unionized government workers. Both were concerned about its negative implications for democratic practice, the health of public finances, and the quality of government services. Back in a minute. Thank you. The stakes involved in permitting collective bargaining and unionization in public sector labor relations, things that sound technocratic and boring, are nothing less than whether democratic policies and fiscal responsibility can ever, for very long, be combined. Organizing government employees, most of whom have nearly life tenure, into interest groups to then negotiate and lobby government provides a motive for government to grow beyond what is required to keep up with increases in population and to cost more than is necessary to attract and maintain a competent public workforce. Fiscal integrity is hard to maintain under such conditions, as a given level of tax revenue ends up purchasing fewer public services. Furthermore, government tends to grow in ways that do not always rebound to the benefit of citizens who rely on government services. Doing anything to counteract such trends becomes even harder in largely one-party states and cities where public sector unions are deeply intertwined with the dominant political party. In sum, the extent and proper structure of American democracy is at stake. That said, just because this book examines some of the adverse consequences of public sector unionism does not imply that there are no other threats to democratic health in the United States. Far from it. The machinations of ideological individuals, business corporations, and citizen associations with considerable political resources also present grave challenges to the public interest. An uninformed and uninterested public and a press corps obsessed with the horse race aspects of political campaigns rather than the substance of public policy present still other hazards. And people can take their pick of a long list of other problems. There's party polarization, income inequality, dysfunctional political institutions, lingering racism, and ethically challenged politicians. Readers should rightly be concerned about them, and good books have been written on all of those topics. However, one can be critical of all those things and still believe that public sector unions are part of the full landscape of problems afflicting American politics. Accepting that public sector unions do not necessarily chime with fiscal integrity, social solidarity, and healthy democratic practice does not require one to reject other sources of American democracy's difficulties. For instance, believing public sector unions are problematic by no means precludes the belief that corporate America exercises too much power or that wealthy individuals have captured too much of the nation's wealth over the last 30 years. These claims are simply not mutually exclusive. Therefore, admitting the obvious that there are other problems with American democracy should not distract us from the study of government unions. And that brings us to the conclusion of part 1 of the book, of chapter 1 of the book, Government Against Itself, all about the power and corruption of public employee unions. Thank you. Who is the socialist? He is the man that is spiritual. He's the man that seeks consensus. He's subjective, petty, and small, taking everything in life personally. He's outrageous, boring, and rude. He pretends to be a leader and a change agent. He pretends that he's your friend. He is sly, cunning, and deceptive. He dresses, acts, and speaks like a slob. He is informal and terminally unique. He is childish and pretends that he knows nothing. He has no conscience and pretends that might makes right and that the ends justify the means. He is impulsive and rationalizes his behavior. He is deterministic, blaming others for his mistakes. He is skeptical, demanding that others solve his problems. His unreasonableness and irresponsibility make him a bad role model, bad father, brother, family member, friend, and a bad person, period. So if you think that you can be friends with a socialist, think again. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, reminding you to be honest, to be smart, to be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.